You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to Literary Treks, TFM's books and comics show dedicated to Star Trek. I am but one of your hosts, Casey Pettitt, and with me, as he always is the wonderful and amazing Jonathan Koan.
Thank you. I'm very interested in where the discussion goes on this book today.
I am as well. It's neither of us have read this, and well, you know, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Let's not spoil it here. And what I'll do first is tell everyone how to contact the show. You can find all of our shows at Trek.fm. And you can send us emails and get in contact with the hosts and everything. Follow the network on X and Instagram at TrekFM. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And while you're there, you can join our listeners only discussion group, the Babel Conference. Just type in BABEL into the Facebook search field and it'll come right up. There's lots of conversations happening in there on various shows, so definitely find us there. And similarly, you can find the show on Goodreads. Just go to the Goodreads groups and look up Literary Treks and you'll find us there. You can look at our bookshelves of all the books we've talked about and even sometimes what's coming up. So that'll be fun. Also, if you are so inclined, we would love your support in a monetary fashion to keep these shows coming to you. Just go to patreon.com/TrekFM and you can become a financial supporter of the network. It takes a lot of money to put these shows together and put them out there for everybody. So any amount that you can give is so much appreciated. And if you're so inclined and have a favorite show, like, I don't know, Literary Treks, or any of our shows, you could become an associate producer like myself and Craig Rosier. And last but not least, wherever you find your podcasts, if you could give us a star rating and a written review, that does so much good for us. It helps people find the show. It helps us know who's listening and also what you think about it. And without further ado, Jonathan, we've got not one, but two new books that we can talk about at this time.
Interesting. The first one is a new Strange New Worlds novel, and this is coming from David Mack. Yes, it's a David Mack Strange New Worlds novel titled Ring of Fire. It is the Simon & Schuster website shows a release date for August 26th, 2025. So I find this interesting first because this is the third Strange New Worlds novel in a row. We had Asylum in November 24. In March or April, we have April. Yeah. Well, around there, spring, we have the next Strange New Worlds Towards the Night with James Swallow writing. And then this is the next announced book. Coming out in August, or not announced, but like one that we know is coming in August for Strange New Worlds, Ring of Fire, from David Mack. And I'm really curious, because when was the last time we had three in a row from a series?
Maybe Discovery, but even
then I think they split them up.
Picard
or an original series, or even Voyager, like.
Yeah, I mean, there's been all sorts of, and it might. I'm kind of wondering if it's just because, you know, Lower Decks, as we record this, I believe their series finale is tomorrow.
Oh, really?
I believe, or it's around now. And so currently I believe that makes Strange New Worlds the only currently running Star Trek show and are currently being produced even. And so I have a feeling that there's just a lot of hype around that, and they're trying to build the hype and keep the tie-ins coming with the show that's still going to continue on.
That makes sense. But at the same time, I mean, thinking back to the 90s, they still, even when Next Gen went off the air, they still produced Next Gen books. When TOS, I mean, they just released a TOS book recently. So it's very curious. The planning at Simon and Schuster. I'd really like to get a discussion with the editors about why a lot of those decision makings are happening. I mean, if it makes sense for the business, go for it. Do the Strange New Worlds books. I'm just really curious.
I mean, we did have Dayton Ward's Next Generation novel, Pliable Truths, fairly recently in 2024. And I just wonder, is there any more plans, in interspersed with these? Like, are we going to find out another book? Because, Asylum got announced, I think, after James Swallow's book, maybe?
It got announced.
No, we got
first.
the cover.
We got the cover for Toward the Night.
We got the cover. That's right.
I don't believe we've ever had the announcements out of order. As far as I've been following Star Trek books since about 2018, and ever since that, which we've slowed down since then. But generally, we get the books announced generally in release order, so we should. We shouldn't have anything else in the interim. I'd be shocked if it's like, in June we actually have another Star Trek book that was not announced. It's like, they want to get the pre-orders started. So
that's a good point. I was wishful thinking that maybe July or June or July of next year we'd get something else, but there's still room at the end of 2025 for another.
I
love the Strange New Worlds books, but it's And if that was not strange, or, I actually wouldn't also be surprised if it was Section 31, because they got the movie coming out this January.
That's why, if, I would have expected if the movie's coming out in January, maybe February, you have a Section 31, prequel movie or something. And it's a Georgiou movie about Section 31. You already have an author who has done a Georgiou Section 31 novel. Why aren't you bringing back John to do a book related to it? Maybe he's too busy with Batman, which might be true, but still, the authors are available. So I don't know
we
why.
Want the books. We'll be as long as they keep pumping them out, we'll keep buying them and reading them.
Yeah. So I'm very curious, but that's thankfully not the only book. It's the only novel announced.
True,
but it's not the only book.
Now, the other one that we've got, John Tenuto actually just made the official announcement on his Facebook page for his new book for Titan, which he's co-written with his wife again, Maria Jose Tenuto. And that book is Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, The Making of the Classic Film. And, Titan has this line of coffee table books, and I've got a handful on my shelf, and, they're pretty great books. We've had a First Contact one, and the Tenutos have written Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, The Making of the Classic Film. Yep. So with the announcement of the Star Trek III one, I think that's super cool. And now on my Santa Claus wish list at the end of this year of 2024, I'm hoping about a year from now we get an announcement for Star Trek IV, The Voyage.
Yeah, it only makes sense for them to do the full 3, because 2, 3, 4 are basically a trilogy for Star Trek. And, if you think about it from the novel's perspective, Vonda McIntyre did those 3 novelizations herself. Keep it consistent doing 2, 3, 4.
Exactly.
Which, I love Star Trek III, Search for Spock. I think it's one of the most underrated Star Trek films. Everybody loves 2, 4, 6, and 8. And everybody hates on 5, and 10 and 9. But 3 is one of those that it just kind of gets forgotten, but I love it.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. And I think, in the hands of the Tenutos, I think we're in for a good book. The Wrath of Khan one that they did was just really interesting, and it's just a fun, look back at the movie, kind of a making of perspective. And, I think that, doing this next one, there's so much about Star Trek 3 that, it was Leonard Nimoy's first time directing a Star Trek film. And I think the original intent was to not have Spock in it. So I'm hoping that it like has, I mean, then they called it the Search for Spock. So Spock's going to show up. But just to, be really kind of cool to revisit that movie again and then, look at the making of it. And, kind of reinvigorate some life or, re-inject some life into that movie that, a lot of people I think forget about sometimes. And the books are pretty expensive. I think they're like $50 usually a pop, but they're, like I said, they're really good quality, big books, a lot of pictures in them. And they're written by fans, so it's something that I think, a lot of fans are going to really enjoy going through.
Hopefully maybe we can make this one of our, I think it's coming September.
Well, I forgot to put that on there, but
it's fall that it's coming.
Yeah.
So maybe we can make that whenever month it releases that'll
podcast. Be nice. And when the Star Trek 2 book came out, Matthew and I did talk to the Tenudos on Literary Treks about it. I should have done a little research and found out what episode that was if people want to go back and listen to it. But when we get back around to it, well, we'll tell people how to go back and they can listen to Literary Treks in order with these books too. Yep. Well, that's not all we've got today. We've got a lot of comics that we're going to catch up on here real quick. Where I think, it kind of been going back and forth. We've gone kind of sometimes without just talking about comics at all, but then like the comics all kind of pile up and then we have to do these like big comic catch up. And then it's like, well, why don't we just go back to doing like one comic or, like all the comics that came out since we last recorded. But with the ongoing series that they have, each of those series seem to be kind of broken down into kind of little mini series or mini arcs, 5 or 6 parts.
Yep.
And so I think, what would be, fun for us or, a little easier for us. Cause like when they stretch out for too long, then it's like, I don't even remember what was in 3 issues ago or anything. So I think, as we go and they're pumping out so many of these comics, it seems like every month that, I think we'll have plenty to talk about, but, to start us off, we left off the Star Trek ongoing.
Yeah.
I shouldn't call it that because that was a previous run, but just the Star Trek line of comics. The last one we talked about was issue 18, and I can't remember off the top of my head what was the conclusion of that one, but we're now into issues 19 through 24, which is called Pleroma, and that's a 6-issue arc of stories. And where we kind of pick up with this one is Talir, who's kind of the Vulcan of the crew. We actually find out that they're actually an Organian incorporated into Vulcan at birth, and they explain that the rest of their species is inside the Organian species from Errand of Mercy, I think, the original series, the Organian Peace Treaty. They're in like a pocket dimension, which they're calling the Pleroma, which is like the hardest word to say 3 times fast. And Cisco takes his ship, the Theseus, to Utopia Planitia at Mars to refit the ship so that they can go save the Organians. And this, I don't know, this is just kind of like, kind of a cool storyline. I think like revisiting the Organians who we don't ever see or talk to, or anything in the books. Like, we just don't get them anymore.
Yeah, we got the Organians there. Pleroma itself was just interesting because it's basically they go into like this almost like other dimension, and Beverly gets all really interested in it because she thinks that the Travelers are there and that Wesley is there, and we do get to reunite with Wesley in the comic for one issue. He shows up for just one issue, and it's all about him. And then that issue ends, and he's kind of like he reunites with Mom, and that's it. And then so he leaves, and then they have this like council where they're like it's different random people. Like there's one person from Roman mythology, and there was one person that was like a what's the Tholian? There's a Tholian in there, and there was the entity from now this was a weird thing. The entity from the Caretaker from Voyager was present as well. It wasn't corporeal. It was just, there. Anyway, they were all present. And, the supervisor was Kor Sung, from Picard season 1. Which was
she was from Picard season 2.
Really?
With the one with Q. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
she was the one in the past that, that Wesley took.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. That's right. That's
yeah.
She's in there. And then, basically, Lore shows up and messes up everything there and
of course
basically destroys Pleroma. No, Pleroma.
Pleroma.
Whatever.
That's why it's a comment.
It destroys that alternate reality and sends, the Theseus to, fluidic space. And as soon as they landed in fluidic space, I was like, yes, Species 8472. I love this. And that's where it ended.
To be continued.
And I was like, no!
Yeah. Well, that's one of these things like, this was an interesting little arc because it, keeps the theme of gods going throughout, which is what we've gotten through the whole thing. Is kind of how Sisko came back. He's still kind of they're trying to lure him back into the celestial temple to be with the prophets and everything.
Yep.
So it's kind of fun. Like, Charlie Evans from the episode Charlie X was, one of these beings at this council of gods or whatever. It's I don't know. It was kind of a fun one, and I'm with you. Like when it ended by ending up in fluidic space, I'm actually kind of looking forward to getting into the next little arc of this series to see where they go and what we do with that. Says, the Borg are going to show up. What are we going to do in fluidic space, or where's this going to go?
Yeah. And then we also have the Defiant series that we're following, issues 12 through 16, which is Hell is Only a Word, parts 1 through 5, where the crew of the Defiant has apparently become bounty hunters.
Yeah,
I must have missed a comic there, but
pretty much
yes. And they go to this Starbase 99, and there is a parasite that infects B'Elanna.
Yes.
And then while they're trying to get it out of B'Elanna, they're also trying to figure out where it is, and they figure out that there's a big wormhole. Not wormhole. That's not the right word. Like gate.
I'm kind of looking at my notes here too. Like it's been a little while since...
something that leads to the parasite dimension. And which Spock is like, "What are you doing, buddy? Why are you opening it? Come on, man, you're better than this." Spock opens it, and so they're trying to fight against it. Which I loved the fighting in this one. It's just Worf and Ro and B'Elanna, that's a great pairing because they just want to tear everything up. And they just want to fight everything. So I really liked that.
And I liked bringing back those parasites from TNG's Conspiracy. I think we actually got them in the in the DS9 relaunch novels. I think they were somehow connected to the Trill, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember that, but maybe they were. It's been a while since I read those.
Yeah, it's been a while, so maybe our listeners can tell us. But it's always fun to see them brought back because they're such an interesting villain or whatever for the for our people. And so I thought that was fun. And of course we know that B'Elanna's not going to die. And what's funny though is that Hugh has to assimilate her to basically save her life, which I'm sure she appreciated.
And Ro, every issue, Ro stops him and is like, you can reverse this, right? And he's like, yes.
Yeah.
And she's like, you can reverse this, right? He's like, yes. And by the third time, I was like, yes, we got it, Ro. We know he can reverse it.
Yeah. And I think there's the Orion Nymeria.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what happened to her. My note just says, let's just say we probably won't see her again.
She gets
at least
trapped
not for a while.
Actually not trapped. So what happens is the only way to cut off the parasites is to blow up the portal from their side. So she takes the portal thing over to their side and then blows it up.
That's right.
It's assumed if she survived, she's stuck over there. But I don't think she survived because she pretty much blew up. But it was weird because I didn't remember if we'd met her before, so I'm seeing her in this. So I was like, okay, interesting character. And then she's dead, and I'm like, all right, well,
yeah,
that's over.
Well, she's one of those characters that I feel like I don't know that they tried to develop her some. Like we got to see some of her time on kind of flashbacks to her time growing up, and at the I think she was in the Orion Syndicate or something, but it was like she didn't even get a name for the first several issues, and I don't know, like I never really gelled with her character just because she was left a little too mysterious for too long, and so I wasn't totally. It'd be interesting to see her come back. I mean, everybody in Star Trek eventually comes back,
right.
But it'll be interesting to see where we go without her, because there's kind of a lot of characters, and so kind of getting rid of some from time to time is not bad. And I mean, and next time we catch up with the Defiant comics, the cliffhanger that it left us on this time was Sela has taken over the Defiant, and her father shows up, and now what's going to happen? And, because I think we got to see some flashbacks from her time. I think even with her father and is she going to try to win his approval? Is she going to fight him? Is she going to become one of the regular crew of a Defiant? Because we had Lore for a while, but then he left, he took, stole data and went off back over to the Star Trek series.
Yep.
And, he's still a villain. So is Selig still going to be a villain, or is, we're going to see some, no pun intended, but now I'm going to fully intend some redemption for her. To those of you that's an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. That she appeared in, I think. Anyway, yeah, I think, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where they take both of these series. I
have read the first 3 issues of the next part of Defiant.
The next one.
Because I didn't realize we were stopping, and all I'll say is that it's weird, but there is another Species 8472 reference. It's not a major thing, but you will know it when you see it.
Awesome. I was actually kind of thinking about that too with the conspiracy parasites. And that kind of other dimension or whatever that Nymeria went to, is if that's somehow going to connect to like fluidic space and find out that they're actually connected somehow to A472. But
I would not be opposed to getting a physical bind up of issues 1 through 24 or issues 1 through 12, of these, if they're out or if they're going to come out, because
I'm pretty sure they do. Yeah.
Reading them as they are, just reading them individually as an EB thing, just is messing with my brain. It's just I'm just always trying to remember. Yeah. But I'm going to try that.
And I know I think Dan Gunther, previous host of Literary Treks, and he's got the Treklit.net, I think is where he does his reviews. But he'll usually, it looks like, review the comics as the bind-ups of the... And I don't know if they do them as the mini series or if they kind of do 2 or the mini arcs.
Yeah, the mini arcs.
Or if they do them or multiples at a time. But I'm pretty sure they're out there. I would assume physically. But yeah, I agree. It is kind of tough when you're trying to follow along and they come out one a month, and it's for only 20 pages or whatever they are. It's hard to remember. They put a lot in these stories, but they kind of go out of my brain pretty quick.
To put a similar comparison, we were talking off camera about this, but one of my favorite authors, Brandon Sanderson, before his epic huge Stormlight books, he puts the preview chapters out once a week for like 10, 15 weeks. And so you can read each chapter as it comes out, and you've read, the first 100 pages, 150 pages of the book. Now, it's not that much when his books are
10%.
10%, but the books are 1,300 pages long. But still, you can start reading the book ahead of time. But I never do that. Because I'm like, look, I want to read it all at once so that I don't have to break it up or get confused and stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, and that is kind of one of the things about these comics that they do is the very first page, like the title page.
I do like that.
Yeah, it has like a recap. Yeah. Sometimes, like on actually quite a few of them, I feel like go back a little too far. Yeah. Like we talk, like they're still talking about like the Day of Blood, and I'm like, boy, that was a while ago. So last year,
yeah.
Whatever. Yeah, like, but it is helpful to kind of just remember where we're at, even if I am reading them in quick succession, just to kind of like get just a real brief synopsis of what I just read, because. There's a lot happening in these comics. There's, a lot to look at, a lot to read. And, I've kind of, I wouldn't never say I've discounted comic books as like a literary form, but like it's never been totally my jam. And you do kind of have to teach yourself how to read them so that you get the most out of them. Yeah. And so, I do have some appreciation for the people that are really, really into comic books and, go through a lot of them because, it does take some work. Even if it's 20 pages, it still takes a little while to get through it and get everything in your brain. But, well, I think, we'll pause there on the comics. Like, I know we still haven't talked about Star Trek 500, which was kind of their big one shot, once they hit the 500th issue, but, I think next time we talk, we'll definitely talk about that one. I'm not sure if these mini arcs in Star Trek or Defiant will have completed an arc yet, so we may not talk about them next time. But I think there is another, so there's Star Trek 500. There might be another one shot that recently came out.
We did the Celebrations one last time.
We did Celebrations, and I think there was the annual last time too, but we'll check and we'll have something to talk about next time. We'll see. But, in the meantime, I guess, we should finally, open this Pandora's box. And
I oppose that pun on the principle of it.
Well, we are here to talk about Star Trek, the Pandora Principle, which was book number 49 in the Star Trek numbered series. Came out back in, I think, April of 1990. So we're going way back here. And this is by Carolyn Clowes, one-time Star Trek author. In fact,
one-time author.
I
Googled. I tried to find. She doesn't have a fantastic fiction page on Goodreads. Her only book is the Pandora Principle. And I was like, maybe if I Google search her, there will be a short story here or a novella here or even, a novel separately. Literally every Google result was just for this book. It was just the only thing in her bibliography. So I always talk about when I can 100% an author's bibliography and be like, I've read all their books. We've read all of Carolyn Clowes' books. So woohoo.
Oh, that's funny. I hadn't thought of it like that, but yes, that's true. I actually do wonder. Oh no, this is. I was going to say, I wonder if this was a pseudonym that she chose, because I was reading on another blog somebody that reviewed this book, and they talked about, and maybe this is talked about in the Voyages of the Imagination book, but this book went through the literary equivalent of development hell, which is what movies go through and they sit for years. Yeah. I guess she wrote this book and it sat for she wrote it in 1985 and it sat until 1990.
Wow.
Just, I don't know if it was going through revisions. I know that there was, changes with the editor and stuff. But if you think about the fact that this was actually written before Star Trek 4,
right,
which Saavik was really not in. I mean, she appeared in very briefly at the beginning and I think at the very end too, but, there's a 5-year gap of other stuff happening and even just the world changing too, and literary tastes changing.
I can guess what happened because I do know that on the film side, when they were working on the original scripts for 6, which would come out in 91, but they were working on it for quite a while. When they were working on the scripts for Undiscovered Country, the original plan was to have Saavik be the Vulcan that's on the ship that betrays them and does all that stuff. And in the early drafts of the script, that was the plan. And I don't remember if it was Robin that said, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to turn evil, or whether it was someone else in the writing team, or if it was
Nicholas Meyer.
Nicholas Meyer. I don't know who decided not to do that, but they eventually decided not to do that. And, they knew Robin wasn't coming back. So the gal that they got for, I forgot the character's name.
Valeris.
Valeris, yeah, for Valeris, was originally signed, I believe, to be Saavik doing evil stuff, and then they rewrote it, and now she's Valeris originally. So I could guess that this book was stuck because they knew they were doing something with Saavik, or they were planning to do something with Saavik, and by the time that they said, all right, we're not actually going to make her turn evil, was probably in 89 when they were writing the script and stuff. And so they said, all right, we're not turning her evil. You can release the book finally. That's my, I mean, I don't know, but that's my guess.
No, that's a good thought, just because like that, I mean, that happens today, the authors that we talk to, and if there's a continuing series, like they have to be careful. I mean, even like the whole literary universe in the 24th century, they had to close down with the Coda books when Star Trek Picard was announced, just so that they weren't stepping on toes or doing something that they knew was going to get overwritten by the screen. So, I buy your theory.
Oh, thank
you. But I mean, let's just say this, and I'm not going to give final thoughts already, but I think that just that gap doesn't really bode well, I think, for the book. And I don't think it would for anything, just because like there are things in this book that there's some things that just don't come to fruition at all. There's some stuff that happens at the very beginning of the book that then just is never mentioned again. And it seems like kind of a Chekhov's gun kind of situation, and then it just never happens. And then there's other things that feel like, and I know we've talked about this with some other books where it almost seems like sometimes, and I'll just get into this part now, like with Kirk.
Yep.
Like, let's just get him out of the way, because that's what they did in the book. They just kind of got him out of the way. And it was weird because I'm fine, like if they want to have a Star Trek book without Kirk being really involved, I mean, that's fine. That's how we get our other characters involved. And I know that he's really the face of the original series, but when you want to focus on other characters like Spock, and in this case, Saavik, Kirk doesn't really fit into that story, but there's the whole Kirk storyline in this book with him just being locked in the vault at Starfleet headquarters was just, he didn't add anything to the story. And I wish they would have just had some reason. He got sick. I don't know, like at the beginning of the book where he's just out of commission. Yeah,
I had the same problem. My general problem with the book is that I think that Carolyn Close tried to do too much. I think that she had so many ideas, so many plans, and she should have honed in the plan. And one of those things in there was the idea, because you have the whole, colony of Vulcans that produce the hybrids. You have the ship that has this weird cloaking technology. You have the box, the Pandora's box, that has the virus that sucks up oxygen. You have the treasure on the planet.
I totally forgotten about until the very end.
So you have all these ideas, and I felt like the oxygen weapon should have been a different thing. Like that should have been, if it was going to be in the book, it should have been the whole crux of the book. And instead, it wasn't. It felt like it was there specifically to get Kirk out of the way. And even then, his character just seemed off in the book. Like Spock felt like Spock to me. Scotty and McCoy felt like Scotty and McCoy to me. So like the other characters, even Uhura seemed like Uhura, but Kirk, he just felt like he got angry too easy. and he dialed it up too fast whenever anything happened. And I was like, it just didn't feel like Kirk.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because the whole reason he ends up getting locked in the vault in the first place, and even here again, like I feel like the easy out for them would have been that. So he was essentially trying to do what you'd expect a young Kirk to do, and basically he was in the vault because he was like changing his orders. You know, Admiral Nagura was like gonna basically put him behind a desk again because he had his fun after Star Trek the motion picture,
right.
And it was time to put him behind a desk again and, you know, make him an admiral again. Because this is between
1 and 2.
This is like 4 years before 2, I guess, because Saavik is just like a brand new cadet. But, you know, so Kirk's trying to be sneaky and eventually has to come clean about it and really doesn't get in much trouble. But I guess when he comes clean, it's kind of in the middle of the crisis. But like Kirk's original reason for going on the vault was to change his orders. And I almost wish that like he had just beamed down to Starfleet headquarters to have a meeting with Nagura to kind of convince him not to put him behind a desk. But in the meantime, some crisis happens and Spock has to, you know, like maybe Kirk gets grounded, but then Spock's like, I got to go take the ship and do this mission because we have to, you know, and then
it would have been funnier if Spock took the ship off on his own and Kirk's like, what? Yeah. You just took the ship? Like in this, he's kind of like,
Enterprise?
You're stealing the Enterprise? Exactly. Like in this book, he's kind of okay with it. He's frustrated. He's not on it, but he like gets it. But it would have been so much better if he was like, you're leaving without me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because that took up a lot of pages, a lot of time, focus, because that's where I feel like there's probably an editor stepping in going, you got to put Kirk in the book. And just sprinkle him throughout. And I feel like that just every time I got to Kirk, I was like
exactly.
Get on with it. Yeah.
And I feel the same way. And I feel like that's because he's the character that's most incorrect. Also, I think there's another character that I think Karen Close didn't nail, but he's the character that felt most off. And so I think she just wasn't as comfortable with him. I personally loved the first chapter. I loved it. I was so excited. I was like, they got the Klingons having this whole big discussion about these hybrid children and what to do with them. And there's discussion of, do we raise them on our ships? Do we raise them on the planet? Do we send them over to the Federation? Like, how do we do that? And there's this great philosophical discussion. And Spock just is very opinionated, and he ends up convincing them, you need to keep them. And then he's like, all right, but you get to take care of the kids. And Spock's like, hang on, I didn't sign up for that. Yeah. And so Spock ends up becoming kind of like the ward, I guess, not the dad. He's not a father to Saavik, but he becomes like her teacher / mentor of her life. And I was so excited because I was like, okay, so now we're going to follow their lives. We're going to see how Spock was as a pseudo father figure. We're going to see, and then nope, it just skipped ahead. Yeah, she's already an adult. And I was like, okay, why'd you set me up such an awesome premise and then not deliver that?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and Spock did agree to take her on pretty quick. Because the other Vulcans, like in this council or whatever, that, you know, when they're standing on Helgard, you know, it's like they're standing in a circle, trying to decide what to do. Because I feel like he kind of gets into it with his father at some point.
Yeah, he does. Like his father, Sarek, is there.
Even that was good. But then, they're like, okay, well, you have to take her. And he's at first he's like, what? And he's like, all right, I can do this, you know. And it was just like, that seems abrupt. That seemed abrupt, yeah. But
it was.
But I think, you know, and I mentioned this to you beforehand. I loved Carolyn Close's prose, and her writing is really good and really engaging. Yeah, that first chapter, I mean, you're kind of in there. You're like, what is happening? What's going on? Because then Spock's getting attacked by this child. He knows it's a child, but he can't see them. He can't find them. But then he gets saved by this teenage girl or whatever. You know, obviously turns out to be Saavik. But these kids are like savages or feral kids, basically. And just like kind of this mystery of who these kids are and what they're like, what happened and everything. Like, you know, you get hooked like right away. And yeah, it was kind of unfortunate that all of a sudden we just fast forward to, was it 6 years later or something like that? 'Cause she's like, she's probably, I feel like she was a little young, when she started the academy, but still like, even at that point, she was very young, but that was that kind of sucked. And and unfortunately, I really did not like much of the stuff that we did get from their early encounters. The way she talked.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you've seen Fifth Element.
I'm not.
Okay. The character that Mila Jovovich plays, Lilu, that's almost how she talks. And so that's all I could hear in my head was, the orange-haired character from The Fifth Element.
And this is where I feel very interesting about it, because if this is an original character, I kind of like what they did with her. But I didn't like that it was Saavik. Because, you were talking about the prose. From a writing perspective, the journey that she takes Saavik on from being the savage type, unhinged teen to slowly being mentored by Spock to being this kind of aloof and kind of confused by humanity that she is later on, and then the anger that she has towards the end of the book against those who wronged her. All of that makes sense. But what we get in the movies, and even what we got in like other projects, which there's not been much with Saavik, but what else we've gotten with her, it just, the end product still didn't feel like it was Saavik herself. And that's why she was the only other character, ironically, because it's for all intents, it's Saavik and Spock's book. And but because we get Spock all the time, it's not as special that it's Spock's book, but it's Saavik's book, which is rare. So if you're going to do a book about Saavik, you got to stick the landing with it.
Yeah.
I was like, eh.
Yeah, because it didn't feel like the Saavik at the end of this book, which is in her first year at the academy. Like she's not even all the way through her first year at the academy at this point. She's like, pretty early on at the academy. I don't feel like 4 years later when we see her in The Wrath of Khan, like just out of the academy, that was such a put together, very Vulcan-like character. And I think even when they shot Star Trek II, I think it was Vonda McIntyre when she wrote the novelizations that came up with, and maybe it was, actually, I think it was in Star Trek VI. I think they were going to bring the half Vulcan, half Romulan thing when they were thinking about using Saavik, but I don't remember if they, and maybe we'll get some of that in, and maybe we did get that in the Tenuto's Star Trek II book that we mentioned earlier in the news segment. But, obviously the half Vulcan, half Romulan thing never made it to screen. But Vonda McIntyre in her novelizations really fleshed out, like she's the one that came up with Hellgard, and that was the name of the planet that she came from and everything. And even I thought it was interesting in this book that the acknowledgments were at the very front of the book instead of the very end of the book, which also maybe should have said something about how this book was going to go. It's like, hey, let's read the thank yous first.
Well, quite a lot of books do the acknowledgments at the beginning.
Really? Oh, I feel like I'm always reading them at the very end, like right before about the author.
A lot. Well, for Star Trek, I think they usually do them at the end. But for like fantasy sci-fi, usually you get them at the front. So maybe that's why it didn't bother.
I didn't bother
me, but I just didn't notice it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so. On a factual, like on her backstory, like logically, a lot of this makes sense. It just didn't feel, accurate to her story. But we've talked about some negatives. I do have personally one positive that I love, and I haven't talked to you about this, so I don't know how you're going to feel about this because I saw in the notes what you wrote about this. But the character of Mr. Obo. Obo. I loved Obo. I thought it was hilarious. I literally had a smile. I was eating this. I was reading this while I was eating at a restaurant, and every time he came up, a smile came on my face when I was reading it because he just cracks me up.
He is a funny little character, but he just, I wouldn't say I disliked Obo. I just feel like it wasn't used maybe to its fullest, because Obo didn't show up. Maybe
until like midway through.
Yeah, midway through, but then like very few times. I feel like enough to establish Obo as a character and one that hung out with I think Harper was the character's name. Mm-hmm. We got to know that it like could fix things, and we got to learn like lots of little things about it. I would have either wanted more or none at all, because then by the time you get to the end where Obo effectively saves the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was worried that Obo was going to die, because like at that point I was invested enough. I'm like, you better not kill Obo after all this. So luckily Obo was an easy fix for Dr. McCoy. But I don't know. It was just it was a little distracting maybe, but like, and that's why I think like I almost wish it was like was it Keenzer, I think, from the newer Star Trek movies, that was like Scotty's like little sidekick in the newer Star Trek movies. I almost wished Obo was actually like a Starfleet, but maybe like some kind of just very unique character that like people just still weren't very familiar with, instead of like basically a stowaway, It was just, and
it's I get that criticism. I did like that, at least from like a structure perspective, it made sense that she introduced him, and then he saved he fixed the ship, and Scotty gets all mad at him, and he's like, but look what I can do, and then he fixes it even more, and they're like, all right, just let him fix it. And 99.2%, by the time 99.2%, and then by the time he saves the day by turning off the self-destruct, which at this point is getting a little bit overused in the Star Trek books. But when he goes and saves the day with the self-destruct sequence, we've established that, it's within his power set that he can do that. So I at least felt that made sense. I would have liked more of him. My problem with him, I liked the character and I had a smile every time he was there. My problem is that he took away, like if you only have X amount of time for the character of Harper, who is the character who is kind of with him, you should spend all of that time with Harper with Saavik, because I think Carolyn Close intended Harper to have like a romantic entanglement with Saavik in this, and I was all for it. And I was like, I like how like nervous his character is, and I like how aloof Saavik is, and like not picking up on his advances and stuff. And I was like, all right, we just get a few times where stuff happened, but a lot of the time he's off doing stuff with Mr. Obo, and so his scenes aren't with Saavik, and so by the end nothing happens. Nothing happens with him and Saavik, and not that they had to they had to end up together and live happily after, because that wouldn't make sense. But at least there should have been more. Like that's where I felt that this is an example of her setting stuff up, because she was like, I want to include a romance, and then never goes anywhere. I want to include this, never goes anywhere, type of thing. Yeah,
and there was a lot of that, because I agreed. Like, I think when he was on the bridge the first time she came onto the bridge, and he was clearly infatuated with her. Yeah. And then later at some point he kind of runs into her, and he's like, I think she's coming out of sickbay, and he's like, oh, I was hoping to talk to you. And she's like, how about right now? And he's like, oh, okay. But I think even at that time he was looking for Obo. And that was kind of a thing too, where it's like, well, and this is where you were talking about earlier, kind of her trying to do too much. And it's like, well, either Harper needed to spend all of his time with Obo and focused on Obo as like his caretaker or whatever, and like, oh, you got on the ship, oh my, I'm gonna have to figure out how to explain this to Spock, or deal with this, and then like, oh no, where'd he go? Like, I don't know where Obo is, and just kind of a little bit of comic relief from time to time, but then to interject that stuff with Saavik, it was a little bit of a letdown by the end when Harper just kind of fades into the background again.
And in a longer book, in a book that is word count longer, page count longer, or in a book that is in a series, if this was a part of a trilogy, you don't have to pay off everything like this. They didn't, like, if this was the first book in a trilogy, we don't need anything to come to fruition with the romance. That can just be the little tease there. If it's the first in a trilogy or a much longer book, you could add other scenes. But this is a pretty, in mass market, it's about 270 pages, which for Star Trek is pretty average, but it's not that small font size. Yeah. It's pretty decent sized font. So you only have very limited word count to get stuff done. So if you're going to include anything, you should do it really well.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we've kind of touched on a little bit is, like I call it the mystery boxes, because that's what these boxes really were that showed up. I mean, like halfway through, I feel like we got to page 100 when everything actually starts happening.
Exactly.
In this book.
That was part of the problem.
Which was rough.
Yeah.
Because, we got these mystery boxes, and they're really the MacGuffin of the story to kind of keep it moving. And I actually kind of liked them. I liked the idea that it's this weapon. And even as they get through the story and even kind of figure out this plot to, the Romulans know that humans will not be able to keep themselves from like looking in these pretty boxes, these Pandora's boxes, really.
Yeah.
And it's, it seems like an insurmountable mystery, there is zero oxygen. There's still air. Like there's nitrogen.
Like they make it seem like it's the end of the universe.
Yeah.
With like these, like if this gets out there, you just kill everyone on the planet. And I'm just like,
but and so it was a little, it was a little much, but it was kind of, I felt like the one thing that kept the story going, because it was what got Spock to have to take the Enterprise out and everything. What was tough was connecting it all back to Saavik. Yeah. And this is where I think the big struggle of any story with Saavik and her upbringing is, why did it have to be Hell.Get where these things were being manufactured? Like it didn't make a lot of sense, because we've got these Romulan Vulcan hybrid kids, and also this plot, like years-long plot to destroy Earth or something. I don't know, but I thought the weapon itself and the whole plot itself was pretty good. I didn't think it had to, I don't think they had to go back to Hell.Get by the end of the story or anything like that.
Right. And really the reason they had to go back is because they want to give her closure on her past and stuff, and get her to kind of admit stuff and stuff. But there's one thing I touched on earlier, is the whole treasure with the stowaway pirate.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, that was the most egregious example of, where did that come from? What?
Yeah.
I was so confused. And again, page time that was devoted to that, which wasn't a lot, but it was like that page. If you only have 272 pages to write this book, take out that plot. Totally unnecessary, totally weird. Just adding, now you have a D plot in addition to the A, B, and C plot, and just take that out. Give it to Harper and Saavik or something. Yeah. Or give it to Saavik and Spock even, and use that to be backstory time or something. But that whole thing, and then that tied into the treasure had to do with a praetor on that was one of the Romulans. I think it was Tan was his name.
Something like that.
Yeah. And I was just like, I can't. That was my, what are we doing here moment with it.
It wasn't until, because when that character of Achenar shows up, the
Achenar, the guy, yeah.
Yeah, he was an interesting character, and again, it's another character that would be, because by the time he showed up, I'd completely forgotten about any treasure. I'd forgotten that we'd even that we'd even seen the Praetor. Yeah, because he had one little blip, maybe early in the book, chapter 2, he had one scene or something like that. But by the time Achenar shows up, and especially once he learns Saavik's name, and he's like, oh, it's Little Cat or whatever it was, the nickname or what Saavik means. I was like, oh, is this another one of the kids? But then they mentioned, no, he's full Romulan.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay, so no, that's not it. And, they'd already confiscated all the stuff. Scotty's got his eye on, like, the whiskey or whatever it is that they find, which they give back to him, so that went nowhere. But,
yep.
And then at the end, when he reveals, like, oh, no, he shows Spock on his little ship when he's kind of leaving at the end, like, oh, no, I've got all this gold and silver and all these Romulan gems. And it's like, what? Like... Yeah,
exactly.
Like, I echo you.
Exactly.
Where did that come from?
Where did that come
from? And so, and what's funny is I liked the character of Achernar. He was mysterious, like you want a Romulan to be. He was helpful, but you kind of don't trust him, or he's trying to help anyways, but nobody trusts him, but then at the end, it's just like, oh, he is literally just a smuggler that has a beef with this Praetor that just got caught up in this mess. Oh, okay, back to Hell.Get, I don't know. Yeah. It was, yeah. Disjointed doesn't necessarily do enough justice to this. This is actually one of those books. I feel like I've read a lot of books lately that are kind of non-linear storytelling. This is one I feel like could have benefited some from some non-linear, some like flashbacks or something, because
flashbacks with Spock raising
Saavik.
Yeah.
And even some flashbacks to, well, no, yeah, just that. Cause like I'm with you. Like the opening, like the first couple chapters even, were great, like great setup for this stuff. And then, like if we'd have picked up with Saavik coming to the Enterprise, with the Enterprise dock there, something, I don't know, something like that, where then they can kind of reminisce, they start their lessons and, whatever, and then kind of get to see glimpses of her past. It might not have been so jarring sitting there for 100 pages reading her weird speech patterns that she had that were borderline offensive probably to some people. And, it's, and like I said, I truly think that she did, like, that the author did a really good job of the actual writing, like the structure, her sentences, like just the prose itself, I felt like was very good. Because when I was reading, I was in it. I was, really enjoying it. But every time I put the book down, which was very easy to do, and unfortunately, I did have a hard time kind of deciding, like, I really need to get back into this. Like I told you, I literally finished reading this like right before we started recording, because I was just like, I don't know, like I was, I guess, frustrated. Maybe it's not that I didn't like it as much as I was just frustrated by it.
Yeah, there's a very much discussion in the literary space about whether or not you want your book to be all about the prose, or you want it to be all about the characters, about the plot. And the general consensus is we want it to be about the characters. If you have amazing character work, your plot doesn't have to be great.
Sure.
And there are some authors where if your plot is so stellar, you don't need character work to be quite that good. I would say that fantasy sci-fi author Kevin J. Anderson, he doesn't always write great character work, but he writes amazing plots, so it makes up for it. Brandon Sanderson is able to do both. So he's able to do both. And then, this book, characters mixed. Spock, I will admit, was really well done. Spock felt great in the book.
Spock was definitely Spock.
He was a Spock. Yeah, she had him good. The other characters, not like specifically the major characters like Saavik and Kirk, just it fell flat for me. And then you say, all right, well, then your plot needs to be really solid, and the plot was all over the place. Yeah. So the only thing you have left is the individual writing style, which works again. As you're reading the book, if your sentence structure is really good, that works really well for you. But in terms of how you view the book down the line after you finished it, you're not normally thinking about how good that is afterwards.
Sure. Yeah. That's very true. And I don't know. I had a lot of high hopes for this. I think I mentioned to you before we recorded, like I didn't really know anything about this book before we before we picked it, except that it had Saavik in it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to call out Greg Cox for. Well,
I'm not going to call him out, but Greg Cox's fault.
Yeah, not to name names. No, like when we talked to him about his book,
Lost to Eternity.
No, thank you. When we talked to Greg Cox about his book Lost to Eternity, he mentioned, when he was putting Saavik into the story, like he mentioned this book as, one of the very few books that have really done much with her at all. And I think that there's, I think that she appears in like the Vulcan's Heart and Vulcan's.
Oh, interesting.
Vulcan's Heart and Vulcan's Soul. Or there's the Vulcan's Soul trilogy, I think. And then there's, anyway, but yeah, very few books. I hesitate to say he recommended it, but I know that he mentioned it,
right?
And which is what I think made us think, oh, we should maybe read that one. And it's got decent reviews on Goodreads, but I don't know. As we kind of close out here, I'm really curious, where after our conversation today, where you landed on this one.
I didn't love it. I didn't think it was that. When I initially wrote my written review for it, I think it was a little bit because again I had just finished the book, and so I was thinking a little bit more about the prose. But if we're talking about out of 5, I'm gonna have to give it a 2 out of 5. I know that's low, but I'm being honest.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think I'm right there with you. This is a book I really wanted to like.
Yeah.
Like I said, when I was reading it, like I was kind of flying through it when I was reading it. Like it was very easy to get through, and we've talked about pluses and minuses, but yeah, this is a tough one to think like, ooh, I think I'd want to read that one again. I think I'd probably land around a 2 as well. And I'm sure there's people out there, and if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, you guys missed the total point of the book, please let us know.
Yes.
I know that I would definitely not call this the worst Star Trek book ever. And I think we've talked about some other ones, but like this is, definitely a lot better than some of those, but some people's least favorite book might be somebody else's favorite book, and I'd love to hear if our listeners have read this one. And
I'll say this: it's my favorite book by Carolyn Close.
Oh, wow, very good. Well, we are. If you're listening to this as it comes out, we're at the end of a year. If you're listening to this, 3 years in the future in August, August of 2027 on a Thursday, let us know. But we're closing out a year here, and we've done a lot. We've had a few new releases this year. We've done a couple shorter series and everything, and we thought, hey, let's do a standalone. But I'm pretty excited because we're gonna start another series here.
Yeah, we are going to start the Gateways series. We are going to begin with book number 1, and I am blanking on the title. Sorry.
One Small Step.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. One Small Step by Susan Wright. This is a TOS story in the Gateway series, and the Gateway series follows, I think, the Challenger, TNG, DS9, Voyager.
New Frontier,
and then there's a crossover book.
Oh yeah, and then there's
at the end. But this one's a TOS, and I'm excited because I've never read this series before. I think you've read part of it, haven't you?
I've read all of them, but it was I don't remember when these books came out, but
it's like 2002, 2003.
Yeah, so I probably read them not long after they came out. Then, so in the early 2000s. But yeah, it's been a long time, and I remember very little. Yeah. Except one thing I do remember is that every book ends on a cliffhanger that is not resolved until the 7th book, which is like short stories that basically resolve all the cliffhangers.
Interesting.
So
okay.
Thinking about this one, I was like, oh, do we read the first book and then read the first story,
that'd be so interesting.
It would be interesting, but I want to say, and I'm always a person, I want to read stuff in the publication
order. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know, like, even Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis even said he does not want people to read them in publication order. He had a specific order he wanted them to be read in. But I was like, you know what, C.S. Lewis, I'm going to read the Chronicles of Narnia in the order that you wrote them. But no, with this, I don't think that there's much in the way of crossovers between each of the books themselves. But I think once you get to the final book, there's enough that it's good to have read, I think, the other books before you get to the stories.
Yeah,
so
we'll wait.
I figured, by the time we get to the 7th book, like later in the year, like hopefully we'll remember the stories.
Yeah, we'll be like, what?
What's happening?
But between the new releases that will be coming out, it'll probably be like next December that we finally
could be, for sure.
Get to book 7. But I'm excited to get to this.
Yeah, I'm excited to do these ones. It's been a long time, and it's nice just because it'll give us a chance to read. We don't have the majority of what we have that has not been covered on Literary Treks is TOS, TNG, maybe some Deep Space Nine. I guess there's some Voyager too, but like beyond that, like I think the other hosts have covered everything. Enterprise. Yeah, I guess we've never really done New Frontier and stuff like that. But like what this does, I feel like it gives us a really good broad range of the different series throughout the year.
We get to see different authors, different series, and different stories. So if a single one doesn't click, it's not like, we got 7 more books by this one author, or we got 7 more books that are following these characters that we don't like. It's any book could have the potential to really hit well.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited to get into that, but. Until then, Jonathan, why don't you tell our listeners how they can follow you and get in touch with you?
You can find me on YouTube at Jonathan Koan, and my Twitter handle is also at Jonathan Koan, and you can find my Goodreads at Jonathan Koan.
Nice. And you can find me on X and Instagram and Blue Sky at Knitting Trekkie. I'm very inactive on those, but I'm trying. I'm trying to get better. And you can also find me poking around. Oh, and on Letterboxd and Goodreads. I don't think I mentioned those either. Those are actually, funny enough, Goodreads is my biggest presence, and then maybe even Letterboxd, but also at Knitting Trekkie. And then on Facebook, you can find me poking around in the Babel Conference and other book groups and everything. So find me there. But thank you all for listening, and until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.